Daniel, do you have your story, your joke ready? Okay, DJ, go straight to Daniel for the joke. Oh wait, am I supposed to do?
Hello, welcome to Neverending Storytelling. How are you doing? Well, today we are going to be reading the Bible, telling a joke. Say hi. Yeah, that's the joke teller. And then we're going to do Kim's synopsis. And Kim's also going to send out the links. And then we're going to read the
I see one person
Story.
online. That's good.
It's probably Mom.
Or Kimmy, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Hi, one person.
Hi.
Hey, Becca or Kimmy, send it to Laura.
Whoever you are, please send a message so we know who you are. 2 people.
2 people. Okay,
Yay!
hi. How are you? Okay, thanks, Kimmy. I don't know why you're sending it to me. I know that I'm online. What? Okay, that actually just slows my computer down. Okay, so not the Neverending Story yet. Okay, Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel. Yay! All right, here we are. Are we ready? This is the English Standard Version of the Bible. I'm going to, as usual, leave a comment with, if anybody wants to follow along, you can follow along right there with that first comment. Do you follow along, Jessica, when you, oh, and Jessica's here too. So, all right. Oh, Jessica, tomorrow night you should do something in the live stream. Yeah. Okay. So, Genesis 11, English Standard Version of the Bible. Now, wait, I've got a comment. Oh, okay, whatever. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they can do, what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. These are the generations of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he fathered Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he fathered Arphaxad 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arphaxad had lived 35 years, he fathered Shelah. And Arphaxad lived after he fathered Shelah 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah lived 30 years, he fathered Eber. And Shelah lived after he fathered Eber 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he fathered Peleg. And Eber lived after he fathered Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg had lived 30 years, he fathered Reu. And Peleg lived after he fathered Reu 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Reu had lived 32 years, he fathered Serug. And Reu lived after he fathered Serug 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug had lived 30 years, he fathered Nahor. And Serug lived after he fathered Nahor 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he fathered Terah. And Nahor lived after he fathered Terah 119 years and had other sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred, in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. The daughters of Haran, the father of Milcah, and Iscah, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. I just want to point out, and I don't want to make a big fuss over it right now, but this is the translation that is made from the Masoretic text, which is the oldest Hebrew text that we have in existence in the world today. It was written about 1000 AD, and it is situated right now in, I believe it's in the city of St. Petersburg. It's called the Codex something. Anyway, that's a lot of weird language. But I also wanted to point out that the Septuagint, which we have older versions of the Septuagint, has an extra 100 years before each of these children were born. So Arphaxad in the Masoretic text says 35 years, but in the Septuagint it says 135 years. Shelah lived 30 years, and it's 130 years in the Septuagint, and so on. Why is this significant? Because I can explain it better with a family tree that I don't have right now, or a timeline that I don't have right now. But basically, Shem, if you follow the timeline, the chronology that is in the Masoretic text, the way it's written, then Shem would have lived all the way until Abram was alive, which is a long time, and it's a little bit awkward, okay? If you just look at it that way. And that doesn't really happen very often for somebody to live 7 generations past. That's not a very common thing. And I'm myself personally, I have to side with the Septuagint here. But that's another story that will be left for another time. Tomorrow we will go ahead with Abram. The story of Abram. Like I said, I didn't want to make too much of a big deal out of it, but I did want to at least mention it. Okay, so here we are. And I believe it is joke time now. So, who do we have that could tell us a joke?
I have a joke. Hello. 1 second. Who comes to a picnic but is never invited? You will have to see in less than 5 minutes. Goodbye.
So, who comes to a picnic but is never invited? We will find out the answer to that in just a few minutes after the synopsis. Oh, Rebecca's just popping in to say hi. I've been very busy, but I have been able to watch Ever video. Bless you. But the one before this one, Ever video, but the one before this one. So I won't be able to listen to the story live with you guys, but I should be able to tomorrow. Okay. I guess we'll accept that. Okay. So here is Kimmy, and I will try to post both this night and last night. I didn't post either of them on YouTube tonight after this live stream. So.
Hey Becca, you mean every video?
No, she means ever.
No,
Ever
never
video.
ending. Never, ever.
It's like ever after, but
No.
video.
It's the ever Neverending story.
The ever-ending story. Na, 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 na.
Look, minus the N.
The Neverending
Yeah.
Story.
Okay. Oh, and I know the answer to Daniel's riddle. Okay, fine. So what happened in the last one was, so Bastian, he wanted to impress Atreyu. So he made up a story of this one person who hunted a unicorn. And the person who hunted a unicorn put a curse on their town, and basically less and less people were born. And then eventually, someone went over to the very same oracle that Atreyu went to. And then they came back, and they said,
Sorry, I'm getting steps in.
you have to make your city the most beautiful ever. So they found these people who were very ugly but made things very pretty. So they made it out of silver, and since they were very ugly, they cried a lot. And that's how the lake came to be. And their silver could withstand the lake. So then what happened was the people who made the city for them, they said that they should be like storytellers. So they were storytellers, and they made a big library that contained all of Bastian's stories, except it was locked. So Bastian went over to the stone and to the library, and there was like a stone that had a riddle on it. So he went over, he solved the riddle, I forgot what, it was like a name or something that he had to say.
Nobody for thousands of years had been able to solve the riddle. Really?
Yes, really.
She's creepy.
I poked you. It's not very creepy. So then what happened was everybody in the whole city was like, yay, there's a whole bunch of books, because they only had like 100 stories, and they had more than 100 storytellers. So now they have like millions of stories. So then Atreyu, he was very impressed. He was like, hey, you made all this stuff up? And he was like, yep. And then there was this one guy, remember the guy who Bastian, it was Knight something or other. But
Hero,
right. Hero something or other. So basically, he was sad and depressed because the person he loved only wanted to marry the best person at everything. And since Bastian beat him, he talked to her afterward, and she was like, hey, I'm sorry, you're not the best. Goodbye.
See ya.
And then she rode away. And then
I'm sorry to say, but you have been eliminated from the race.
and then Bastian, he made up a story about a dragon that kidnapped her. And he said, oh, hey, this dragon just kidnapped her. And he gave a detailed description of how to beat the dragon. And according to the Neverending Story, he did beat the dragon and save her, but she was begging him to marry her. But he was like, nope, sorry. But that is a story for another time.
So that's the end of the synopsis. I hope you guys are enjoying it. I hope you guys are enjoying the never-ending. We have an answer to the joke.
So the answer to the joke is ants, both meanings.
So I'm not sure if it's ants or if he means aunts are invited, not invited to a picnic, but always show up. If it's ants or aunts. So if you would please put your comment whether you think it's aunt or aunt, because they kind of sound the same, unless, like, if you're from Texas, I say aunt. You know, I have some aunts like Aunt Brenda, Aunt Pat. We don't say aunt in Texas, so we say aunt. So if you think that it's aunt, then write aunt in the comments, and if you think it's aunt, then write aunt in the comments. I'm interested in seeing what we've got here. But anyway, right now we're going to start chapter 18, the Icarus, or the Icarus. How about the Icarus? The first letter is R. Rain was coming down in buckets. It must have been in Oklahoma. The black, wet clouds hung so low they seemed almost to graze the heads of the riders. Then big, sticky snowflakes began to fall, and in the end, it was snowing and raining in one. Definitely not Oklahoma. The wind was so strong that even the horses had to brace themselves against it. The riders' cloaks were soaked through and flapped heavily against the backs of the beasts. For the last 3 days, they had been riding over a desolate high plateau. The weather had been getting steadily worse, and the ground was a mixture of mud and sharp stones that made for hard going. Here and there, the monotony of the landscape was broken by clumps of bushes or of stunted wind-bowed trees. Bastian, who rode in the lead on his mule Yika, was fairly well off with his glittering silver mantle, which, though light and thin, proved to be remarkably warm and shed water like a duck. The low-slung body of Hicryon the Strong almost vanished in the thick blue woolen coat. The delicately built Hisbald had pulled his great loden hood over his red hair, and Hydorn's grey canvas cloak clung to his gaunt frame. Yet, in their rather crude way, the 3 knights were of good cheer. They hadn't expected their adventure with Sir Bastian to be a Sunday stroll. Now and then, with more spirit than art, they sang into the storm, sometimes singly and sometimes in chorus. Their favorite song seemed to be one that began with the words, "When that I was a little tiny boy, with hey-ho, the wind and the rain." As they explained, this had been sung by a human who had visited Fantastica long years before, name of Shakespeare or something of the sort. The only one in the group who didn't seem to mind the cold and the rain was Atreyu. On Falcor's back, he rode high above the clouds, flying far ahead to reconnoiter and rejoining the company from time to time to report on what he had seen. They all, even the luck dragon, believed they were looking for the road that would take Bastian back to his world. Bastian thought so too. He himself didn't realize that he had agreed to Atreyu's suggestion only to oblige his friend, and that wasn't what he really wanted. But the geography of Fantastica is determined by wishes, which may or may not be conscious. And since it was Bastian who led the way, they were actually going deeper and deeper into Fantastica, heading for the ivory tower at its very center. What the consequences for him would be, he wouldn't learn until much later. For the present, neither he nor his companions had any idea where they were going. Bastian's thoughts were busy with a different problem. On the 2nd day of their journey, in the forest surrounding the Lake of Tears, he had seen unmistakable traces of the dragon Smurg. Some of the trees had been turned to stone, no doubt by contact with the monster's ice-cold fire. Remember, Smurg was the dragon from yesterday. and the prints of the giant grasshopper feet were clearly discernible. Atreyu, who was skilled in woodcraft, had seen other tracks as well, those of Hero Henrik's horse, which meant that Henrik was close on the dragon's heels. That doesn't really thrill me, said Falkor, rolling his ruby-red eyes. Monster or not, this Smurg is a relative of mine, a distant one to be sure, but a relative all the same. He was only half in jest. They had not followed Hero Henrik's track, but had taken a different direction, since their supposed aim was to find Bastian's way home. And now Bastian was asking himself, had it really been such a good idea to invent a dragon for Hero Henrik? True, Henrik had needed a chance to show his mettle, but was it certain that he would win? What if Smurg killed him? And what about Princess Oglamar? Yes, of course, she had been haughty, but was that a reason for getting her into such a fix? And on top of all that, how was he supposed to know what further damage Smurg might do in Fantastica? Without stopping to think, Bastian had created an unpredictable menace. It would be there long after he was gone and quite possibly kill or maim any number of innocents. As he knew, Moonchild drew no distinction between good and evil, beautiful and ugly. To her mind, all the creatures in Fantastica were equally important and worthy of consideration. But had he, Bastian, the right to take the same attitude? And above all, did he wish to? No, Bastian said to himself, he had no wish to go down in the history of Fantastica as a creator of monsters and horrors. How much finer it would be to become famous for his unselfish goodness, to be a shining model for all, to be revered as the good human or the great benefactor. Yes, that was what he wanted. The country became mountainous, and Atreyu, returning from a reconnaissance flight, reported that a few miles ahead he had sighted a glen which seemed to offer shelter from the wind. In fact, if his eyes had not deceived him, there were several caves round about where they could take refuge from the rain and snow. It was already late afternoon, high time to find suitable quarters for the night. So all the others were delighted at Atreyu's news and spurred their mounts on. They were making their way through a valley, possibly a dried-out riverbed, enclosed in mountains which grew higher as the travelers advanced. Some 2 hours later they reached the glen, and true enough, there were several caves in the surrounding cliffs. They chose the largest and made themselves as comfortable as they could. The 3 knights gathered brushwood and branches that had been blown down by the storm, and soon they had a splendid fire going in the cave. The wet cloaks were spread out to dry, the beasts were brought in and unsaddled, and even Falkor, who ordinarily preferred to spend the night in the open, curled up at the back of the cave. All in all, it wasn't such a bad place to be in. While Hydorn, the Enduring, tried to roast a big chunk of meat over the fire and the others watched him eagerly, Atreyu turned to Bastian and said, "Tell us some more about Krista." "About what?" Bastian asked. "Your friend, Krista, the little girl you told stories to." "I don't know any little girl by that name," said Bastian. "And what makes you think I told her stories?" Once again, Atreyu had that thoughtful look. "Back in your world," he said slowly, "you used to tell lots of stories, some to her and some to yourself." "How do you know about that, Atreyu?" "You said so yourself in Amarganth, and you also said that people made fun of you for it." Bastian stared into the fire. "That's true," he muttered. "I did say that, but I don't know why. I can't remember." It all seemed very strange. Atreyu exchanged glances with Falkor and nodded gravely as though something one of them had said had now been proved true, but he said nothing more. Evidently, he didn't wish to discuss such matters in front of the three knights. "The meat's done," Hydorn announced. He cut off a chunk for each one, and they all began to eat. Done was a gross exaggeration. The meat was charred on the outside and raw on the inside, but under the circumstances there was no point in being picky or choosy. For a while they were all busy chewing. Then Atreyu said to Bastian, "Tell us how you came to Fantastica." "You know all about it," said Bastian. "It was you who brought me to the childlike empress." "I mean, before that," said Atreyu. "In your world, where did you live, and how did it all happen?" Then Bastian told how he had stolen the book from Mr. Coriander, how he had carried it off to the schoolhouse attic and begun to read. When he came to Atreyu's great quest, Atreyu motioned him to stop. He didn't seem interested in what the book said about him. What interested him in the extreme was the how and why of Bastian's visit to Mr. Coriander and of his flight to the attic of the schoolhouse. Bastian racked his brains, but about those things he could remember nothing more. He had forgotten everything connected with the fact that he had once been fat and weak and cowardly. His memory had been broken into bits, and the bits seemed as vague and far away as if they had concerned an entirely different person. Atreyu asked for other memories, and Bastian spoke about the days when his mother was still alive, about his father and his home, about school and the town he lived in. As much as he remembered, the three knights had fallen asleep, and Bastian was still talking. It surprised him that Atreyu should take such an interest in the most everyday happenings. Maybe it was because of the way Atreyu listened that these everyday things took on a new interest for Bastian, as though they contained a secret magic that he had never noticed before. At last, he ran out of memories. It was late in the night. The fire had died down. The three knights were snoring softly. Atreyu sat there with his inscrutable look, as though deep in thought. Bastian stretched out, wrapped himself in his silver mantle, and had almost fallen asleep when Atreyu said softly, "It's because of Oren." Bastian propped his head on his hand and looked sleepily at his friend. "What do you mean by that?" "The gem," said Atreyu, as though talking to himself, "doesn't work the same with humans as with us." "What makes you think that?" "The amulet gives you great power. It makes all your wishes come true, but at the same time it takes something away, your memory of your world." Bastian thought it over. He didn't feel as if anything had been taken away from him. Grogamon told me to find out what I really wanted, and the inscription on Oren says the same thing, but for that I have to go from one wish to the next without ever skipping any. That's why I need the gem. "Yes," said Atreyu, "it gives you the means, but it takes away your purpose." "Oh well," said Bastian, undismayed. "Moonchild must have known what she was doing when she gave me the amulet. You worry too much, Atreyu. I'm sure Auron isn't a trap." "No," said Atreyu, "I don't think so either." And after a while he added, "Anyway, it's good we're looking for the way back to your world. We are, aren't we?" "Oh yes," said Bastian, already half asleep. In the middle of the night he was awakened by a strange sound. He had no idea what it was. The fire had gone out, and he was lying in total darkness. Then he felt Atreyu's hand on his shoulder and heard him whisper, "What's that?" "I don't know," Bastian whispered back. They crept to the mouth of the cave and listened. A great many creatures seemed to be trying to fight back their sobs. There was nothing human about it, and it didn't sound like animals in pain. Starting as a whisper, it swelled to a sigh, then ebbed and rose, ebbed and rose. Never had Bastian heard anything so mournful. "If at least we could see something," Atreyu whispered. "Wait," said Bastian. "I've got Al-Sar." He took the glittering stone Al-Tazar. Al-Sahir. I think it's Al-Sahir. He took the glittering stone from his pocket and held it high. It gave hardly more light than a candle, but in its faint glow, the friends saw enough to make their skin crawl with horror. The whole glen was alive with hideous, foot-long worms who looked as if they had been wrapped in soiled rags. Slimy little limbs protruded from the folds in their skin. At one end, two lidless eyes peered out from under the rags, and from every eye flowed tears. Thousands of tears. The whole glen was wet with them. The moment the light from Al Sahir hit them, the creatures froze, and the friends were able to see what they had been doing. At the center of the glen stood a tower of the finest silver filigree, more beautiful and more valuable than any building Bastian had seen in Amarganth. Some of the worm-like creatures had evidently been climbing about on the tower, joining its innumerable parts. But at present they all stood motionless, staring at the light of Al Sahir. A ghoulish whisper passed over the glen. Alas! Alas! What light has fallen on our ugliness! What eye has seen us! Cruel intruder! Whoever you may be, have mercy! Take that light away! Bastian stood up. I am Bastian Balthazar Bux. Who are you? We are the Icarus. We are the unhappiest beings in all Fantastica. Bastian said nothing and looked in dismay at Atreyu. Then, he said, it's you who created Amarganth, the most beautiful city in Fantastica. Yes, the creatures cried, but take that light away and don't look upon us. Have mercy. And with your weeping, you made Moru, the lake of tears. Master, they groaned, it's true, but we'll die of shame and horror if you make us stand in this light. Why must you add to our torment? We've never done anything to you. Bastian put Al Sahir back in his pocket, and again the night was as black as pitch. Thank you, cried the mournful voices. Thank you for your merciful kindness. I want to talk with you, said Bastian. I want to help you. He was almost sick with disgust, but he felt very sorry for the poor things. It was clear to him that they were the creatures he had mentioned in his story about the origin of Amarganth. But here again he couldn't be sure whether they had always been there or whether they owed their existence to him. In the latter case, he was responsible for their misery, but either way, he was determined to help them. Oh, oh, the plaintive voices whispered, no one can help us. I can, said Bastian. I have Auron. At that, they all seemed to stop weeping at once. Where have you come from? Bastian asked. A chorus of many voices whispered, we live in the lightless depths of all the earth to hide our ugliness from the sun, and there we weep all day and all night. Our tears wash the indestructible silver out of the bedrock and burn it, and from it we spin the filigree you have seen. On the darkest nights we mount to the surface, and these caves are our coming out places. Up here we join together the sections we've made down below. We've come tonight because it was dark enough for us to work without seeing one another. We work to make amends to the world for our ugliness, and that comforts us a little. But you're not to blame for your ugliness, said Bastian. Oh, there are different ways of being to blame, the Icarus replied. In what you do, in what you think, we're to blame for just living. How can I help you? Bastian asked. He felt so sorry for them that he could hardly hold back his own tears. Oh, the great benefactor, the Icarus cried. You've got Auron. With Auron you can save us. We have only one thing to ask of you. Give us different bodies. Don't worry, said Bastian. I will. Here's my wish, that you shall fall asleep, that when you wake you shall crawl out of your skins and turn into bright-colored butterflies, that you shall be light-hearted and happy, and that beginning tomorrow you shall no longer be the Icarus, the everlasting weepers, but the Schlamoofs, the everlasting laughers. Bastian awaited their answer, but no sound came from the darkness. They've fallen asleep, Atreyu whispered. The two friends went back into their cave. Hisbald, Hydorn, and Hicryon were still snoring gently. They had slept through the whole incident. Bastian lay down. He was extremely pleased with himself. Soon all Fantastica would learn of the good deed he had done. It had really been unselfish, since no one could claim that he had wished anything for himself. There would be nothing to mar the glory of his goodness. What do you think, Atreyu? He whispered. Atreyu was silent for a while. Then he replied, I only wonder what it may have cost you. Not until somewhat later, after Atreyu had fallen asleep, did it dawn on Bastian that his friend had been referring not to his self-abnegation, but to his loss of memory. But he gave the matter no further thought and fell asleep in joyful anticipation of the morrow. The next morning the three knights woke him up with their cries of amazement. Would you look at that? My word! Even my old mare is giggling! They were standing in the mouth of the cave, and Atreyu was with them. But Atreyu wasn't laughing. Bastian got up and went out. The whole glen was crawling and flitting and tumbling with the most comical little creatures he had ever seen. They all had bright-colored butterfly wings on their backs and were wearing the weirdest outfits, some checkered, some striped, some ringed, some dotted. All their clothes looked either too loose or too tight, too big or too small, and they were pieced together every which way. Nothing was right, and there were patches all over, even on the wings. No two of these creatures were alike. They had faces like clowns, splotched with every imaginable color, little round red noses, or absurdly long ones, and enormous rubbery mouths. Some wore top hats, others peaked caps. Some had only 3 black-red tufts of hair, and some had shiny bald heads. Most were sitting or hopping about on the delicate filigree tower, or dangling from it doing gymnastics, and in general doing their best to wreck it. Bastian ran out to them. Hey, you guys! He shouted. Cut that out! You can't do that! The creatures stopped and looked down at him. One at the very top of the tower asked, What did he say? And one from further down replied, The McCallum says we can't do this. Why does he say we can't do it? Asked a third. Because you just can't, Bastian screamed. You can't just smash everything up. The McCallum says we can't smash everything up, the first butterfly clown informed the others. We can too, said another, tearing a big chunk out of the tower. Hopping about like a lunatic, the first called down to Bastian, We can too! The tower swayed and creaked alarmingly. Hey! What are you doing? Bastian shouted. He was angry and he was frightened, but at the same time, he had all he could do to keep from laughing. The first butterfly clown turned to his companions. The whatchamacallum wants to know what we're doing. What are we doing? Asked another. We're having fun, said a third. But the tower will collapse if you don't stop, Bastian screamed. The whatchamacallum, the first clown informed the others, says the tower will collapse if we don't stop. So what? Said another, and the first called down. So what? Bastian was speechless, and before he could find a suitable answer, all the butterfly clowns on the tower began to do a sort of aerial round dance. But instead of holding hands, they grabbed one another by the legs or collars, while some simply whirled head over heels through the air. And all bellowed and laughed. The act that the winged creatures were putting on was so light-hearted and comical that Bastian gave up trying to hold back his laughter. "But you can't do that," he called to them. "The Icarus made it, and it's beautiful." The first butterfly clown turned back to the others. "The whatchamacallum says we can't do it." "We can't do anything that's not forbidden," cried another, "we can do anything that's not forbidden," cried another, turning somersaults in the air. "And who's going to forbid us? We're the slamoofs." "Who's gonna forbid us anything?" all cried in chorus. "We're the slamoofs." "I am!" cried Bastian. "The whatchamacallum," the first clown explained to the others, "says I." "You?" said the others. "How can you forbid us anything?" "No," said the first, "not I. The whatchamacallum says he." "Why does the whatchamacallum say he?" the others wanted to know. "And who is he saying he to in the first place?" "Who are you saying he to?" the first butterfly clown called down to Bastian. "I didn't say he," Bastian screamed, half fuming, half laughing. "I said I forbid you to wreck this tower." "He forbids us," said the first clown to the others, "to wreck this tower." "Who does?" inquired the one who had just turned up from the far end of the glen. "The whatchamacallum," the others replied. "I don't know any whatchamacallum," said the newcomer. "Who is he, anyway?" The first sang out, "Hey, whatchamacallum, who are you, anyway?" "I'm not a whatchamacallum," said Bastian, who was by then moderately angry. "I'm Bastian Balthazar Bucks, and I turned you into Slamoose so I wouldn't have to cry and moan, so you wouldn't have to cry and moan the whole time. Last night you were still miserable Icarus. It wouldn't hurt to show your benefactor some respect." The Schlamoofs all stopped hopping and dancing at once and stood gaping at Bastian. A breathless silence fell. "What did the whatchamacallum say?" whispered a butterfly clown at the edge of the crowd, but his next-door neighbor cracked him in the head so hard that his hat slid down over his eyes and ears, and all the others went "Wouldn't you be so kind to repeat all that very slowly and distinctly?" the first butterfly clown requested. "I am your benefactor!" cried Bastian. This threw the Slamoofs into an incredible state of agitation. One passed the word on to the next, and in the end the innumerable creatures, who up until then had been scattered all over the glen, gathered into a knot around Bastian, shouting in one another's ears, "Did you hear that? He's our benefactor. His name is Nastiban Baltabux. No, it's Buxian Benedictor. Rubbish. It's Siratit Buxaben. No, it's Baldrian Hicks. Schlooks. Baldabratron. Billy Scooter. Nix Flax Strix." Besides themselves with enthusiasm, they shook hands all around, tipped their hats to one another, and raised great clouds of dust by slapping one another on the back or belly. "We're so lucky," they cried. "3 cheers for Buxifactor Zanzibar Bastabeln." Screaming and laughing, the whole great swarm shot upward and whirled away. The hubbub died down in the distance. Bastian stood there, hardly knowing what his right name was. By that time, he wasn't so sure he had really done a good deed. Chapter 19 is called The Traveling Companions. The first letter, anybody want to guess? It's The last chapter, the first letter was R. Oh, Daniel's got it. It's S. The first letter is S. All right. So it is 9 pages. We're already at 45 minutes. We started a little late, so I think we're going to have to call it for tonight. But I am enjoying reading to you guys. I hope y'all are enjoying the story. I know Kimberly was giggling during some of that. I hope that it was funny for some other people as well. And I hope that you all have a good night. God bless you. And we love you. Good night. Yay.